This next topic we're going to get into here, this one's a bit of speculation more so than news, but it is something that I think is worth at least discussing here, and that's going to be the possibility that Brandon Aiyuk, on top of already seeing Deebo Samuel get traded, may be in the cards. Now, I'll go ahead. We'll throw this up so we can take a look at it here because it's not that far-fetched. Yes, the Deebo Samuel move was a big one. It completely alters the look of the wide receiver room in San Francisco. But Ian Rappaport himself tweeting this out this past weekend from the Combine broadcast. After the 49ers traded Deebo Samuel, could they also trade Brandon Aiyuk? That would be a challenge, but, keyword but there, they do need money to pay Brock Purdy and others. Now, that is the interesting wrinkle of that piece right there because in my eyes, there are guys that do need to get paid down the road over the next couple of years, and Brandon Aiyuk's $30 million a year and already losing him for a season kind of blows a hole in what they're doing, so it makes him expendable. How expendable, though, and how likely for him to actually get moved is kind of the topic of conversation here. Like Ian Rappaport said, Brock Purdy does need to get paid, but you also have somebody like George Kittle who's coming off a really productive season last year, who's going to need to re-up prior to the 2026 season if he has himself another good year this season as well. And you don't have a real clean out of Brandon Aiyuk's contract until like 2027. And I emphasize the word clean there because you can always move on from a guy. Like that's always a possibility. But if he gets traded before June 1st, it's going to net the 49ers a $66 million dead cap hit on this year's salary cap. $66 million essentially blows out any of the money gained from the salary cap rising this offseason and then some on top of that. And when you're trying to deal with a contract situation where you have Brock Purdy, who's probably going to get paid at minimum, and the reason I'm saying this number is because there are people who are concerned about paying him over $50 million a year, but he's going to make at minimum $40 to $45 million. I wouldn't be shocked if it goes north of that $50 million number. And you need that cap space. Otherwise, you're just tacking on all those crazy void years. The money has to get pushed down the road further. And I don't want to see San Francisco turn into one of those teams like the New Orleans Saints who's just kicking the can down the road and they're finding themselves hundreds of $millions in cap space over the cap. Like, that's not what I want to see. And I don't think San Francisco would be interested in doing that. You could also trade him post June 1st, which it kind of kicks the can down the road. It alleviates the number a little bit. It nets you $9.1 million in dead cap this year, which makes this season feasible. And then you can bank on another massive jump in the salary cap that the other $57 million you'd have to eat next year isn't as damning, I guess. But again, at the same time, you're talking nearly $60 million in cap space being eaten up because you have one guy. Now, there's that, but then there's also comments being made by the 49ers GM himself, John Lynch, on the Brandon Aiyuk potential trade rumors here, and I'll read this quote from him. That typically happens with really good players. I remember 2 years ago having similar conversations. You get calls, and you always listen to calls. Since Kyle and I have been here, we've been the number 2 cash spending team. In the last 4 years, we're the 4th highest cash spending team. So at some point, you do have to reset a little bit or at least recalibrate. You can't just keep pressing the pedal. I think there's some good that can come out of that. We need to get younger. I think we're the oldest team in football after trying to make a run last year, and I think it's good to constantly get younger. Our draft class last year was a great move toward that. We'll have 4 picks in the top 100, and if the comp picks happen the way like we see it, we'll have 10 picks overall, and we're excited about adding more youth to the great core of players we already have here. That does sound like a guy that's at least open to trading Brandon Aiyuk if the compensation is right. So it begs the question of, like, is it realistic that San Francisco moves on from Brandon Aiyuk? I want to say no more than yes, and I would probably lean like 80-20, 70-30 to no, where he's probably playing for the 49ers at least next year, and then you maybe try to move on from him after that if you see fit. I will say, though, that there are logical moves or just teams that you could move him to if the opportunity is right, and you could convince one of these teams that have a litany of dollars to work with and tons of cap room, like the Patriots, like the Raiders, like the Bears, like the Chargers, all 4 of those teams needing a wide receiver to add to their room. Now, the Patriots, Aiyuk already said no to last year, so This one feels like the least likely of the four, but that was prior to them going through this head coaching regime change that they've gone through over there, and also understanding what it is exactly that they have in a quarterback of Drake May. So maybe it's a little bit more of a tantalizing offer now. You have a team like the Raiders, who no quarterback right now. They're trying to work through that, but Tom Brady is clearly hell-bent on solidifying that position, and it seems like they are working towards a resolution there, whether it's somebody like a Justin Fields, a Russell Wilson, depending on what happens with their Pittsburgh quarterbacks and who's allowed to walk from over there. A team like the Bears, who now has Ben Johnson, an exciting offensive-minded head coach. I could see Brandon Aiyuk wanting to maybe go and play with a talented Caleb Williams, especially in that potential offense there after looking at how good the Lions have been the last few years. And then a team like the Chargers, who now with Jim Harbaugh, organizational stability. You just made the playoffs. You have Justin Herbert. Ladd McConkey would be a beautiful complement to him. You also bring now Brandon Aiyuk into the mix, and you have yourself not only a strong running game in LA, but you also now have yourself a legit group of pass catchers for Justin Herbert to throw the football to. The Packers are another team that I do have in mind because they are looking for like a number one, and Brandon Aiyuk is considered a number one, I guess you could say, but rumors are that they're in on trading for DK Metcalf right now, so they were kind of just like an honorable mention in my eyes for this, but not really a team that I consider in the mix. But they are actively looking for a wide receiver, and there's rumors about trade compensation and such, so I figured they were at least worth mentioning here. And then the other side is like, what would this mean for the 49ers if he does get moved? The way I see it, if he does get traded, they're willing to eat all this cap money, whether it's pre-June 1st, post-June 1st, however they try to go about doing it. It does say two things to me, or I guess three things. One, they obviously really believe in Brock Purdy's ability to elevate the guys around him. There is some conversation surrounding his ability to do just that, because when guys were down and hurt, it felt like Brock Purdy's play did slip last year and in other spots during his career as well. But for me, somebody who does actually like Brock Purdy and thinks he's a serviceable quarterback, there is a conversation to be had about what his actual ceiling is if he doesn't have a ton of talent surrounding him. But I do think he is good enough to make a playoff run and a Super Bowl appearance, as we've already seen in his career so far. But the other things it tells me is that, A, they are very high on Ricky Pearsall, and they think that he can be a legit guy for this offense. And I think we saw a lot of that, especially on the back half of last season. But also that maybe there is some buyer's remorse and maybe a feeling that they paid the wrong receiver, because Juwan Jennings, in the absence of Brandon Aiyuk last year, was unbelievable. And he is a guy that I am pulling for tremendously at this point. I love the way he plays the game. He runs so hard, so angry for a wide receiver, and he makes plays happen with the ball in his hands, and he makes plays happen before the ball gets in his hands. But that's somebody who, in certain spots last year, I felt like I'm sitting back watching the 49ers playing and going, oh my God, did they pay the wrong wide receiver $30 million a year? Because Juwan Jennings brings some game. So that's a few of the things that I'm looking at with San Fran. Ultimately, if I was to stand on like my personal opinion, this is where I would kind of draw the line in the sand. I could see the path to a potential Brandon Aiyuk trade, and I wouldn't walk away from this being surprised even with what I'm about to say here, but I do think Brandon Aiyuk's around for at least one more season, just because the money itself alone is a lot to eat when you're in the process of trying to work on a contract for a franchise quarterback at this point, if that makes sense. I just feel like the number is way too high right now, and you could always wait till June or post June 1st of next year, where you could again spread whatever the cap hit number is going to be, the dead cap money, over a couple of seasons rather than one. It won't be as damning. Like, that's probably the more likely situation of it all. I just feel like $66 million is a lot to eat when you're trying to sort out Brock Purdy's contract at this current moment here. And even at 57, if you wait till after June 1st, is still just a ridiculously high number. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Brandon Aiyuk moved. I'd be shocked to see him moved sooner rather than later. That's probably the best way I can put that. So I don't expect it now, but I do expect it maybe at some point in the future.